The morning sun cast golden light through the kitchen window as Priya stirred her tea, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. At 32, she had grown accustomed to the emptiness of the small apartment she once shared with her husband, Raj. 3 years had passed since they separated, but memories lingered in every corner. Their love story had begun like many others, a chance meeting at a friend's wedding, shy glances across a crowded room, and conversations that lasted until dawn. Priya had been a promising dancer then, her performances earning recognition across the city. Raj was an ambitious engineer with dreams of starting his own company. They fell in love quickly, their dreams and aspirations intertwining like vines climbing toward the sun. "You're going to be famous one day," Raj would tell her, his eyes filled with pride as he watched her practice. "And I'll be there, cheering you on from the front row." Priya smiled at the memory as she glanced at the framed newspaper clipping on her wall, her last major performance before everything changed. She hadn't touched her dancing shoes in almost 4 years now. The phone rang, jolting her back to reality. It was Dr. Sharma calling about her latest test results. "The treatment is working, Priya," he said, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "But we need to continue for at least another 6 months. Are you managing the side effects?" "Yes, doctor," she replied, her voice steady despite the wave of exhaustion washing over her. "I'm doing fine." After hanging up, Priya leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. Fine was a relative term. The truth was, some days she could barely get out of bed. The treatments drained her completely, leaving her weak and nauseous. But no one knew about this, not her parents in their small village who believed she was thriving in the city, not her friends who had slowly drifted away, and certainly not Raj. Especially not Raj. The divorce papers had come as a shock 3 years ago. "I can't do this anymore," he had said, his voice breaking. "You've changed, Priya. You're distant. You've given up on your dancing, on us, on everything we dreamed about. I feel like I don't know you anymore." She had wanted to tell him then. The words had formed on her lips, desperate to be spoken. But instead, she had signed the papers without argument. Later that morning, Priya got ready for work at the small accounting firm where she had found employment after their separation. Her job was unexciting but stable, with understanding colleagues and health insurance that covered most of her medical bills, the real reason she had taken the position. As she applied concealer to hide the dark circles under her eyes, Priya thought about the decision she had made 4 years ago. The diagnosis had come just 2 weeks after Raj secured funding for his startup. Breast cancer, aggressive and requiring immediate treatment. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the doctor had laid out the battle plan with clinical precision. That same evening, Raj had burst through their apartment door, his face alight with joy. "We did it, Priya. We got the investment. In 2 years, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be able to buy that house we've been dreaming of. Maybe even start a family." His excitement had been contagious, his dreams so vibrant and full of hope. She had made her decision that night as he slept peacefully beside her. She wouldn't tell him about the cancer. His company was just beginning to take off, and she knew Raj, he would drop everything to care for her. He would drain their savings, take loans, maybe even give up on his business altogether. Their future, everything they had planned, would crumble. So she created a different narrative. She became distant, irritable, uninterested in dancing or in their social life. She picked fights over small issues and withdrew emotionally. It was a carefully crafted plan to push him away while she fought her battle alone. "It's for the best," she whispered to herself as she closed her apartment door and headed to work. "He's happy now, successful. That's all that matters." What Priya didn't know was that life had its own plans, ones that would soon bring their separate paths crashing back together in ways neither of them could have imagined. As she walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her friend Deepa, the only person who knew about her illness. Have you seen the news? Raj's company just went public. He's on the front page of the business section. Priya's heart skipped a beat. She quickly searched for the article online and there he was, Raj standing proudly outside his company headquarters, a confident smile on his face. The headline read, "Local tech startup becomes overnight success." Her eyes scanned the article, pride swelling in her chest. He had done it. All those late nights, the endless planning, the sacrifices, they had paid off. There was a quote from him near the end, "Success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. I've learned that the hard way." The bus arrived, and Priya stepped on, finding a seat by the window. As the city passed by in a blur, she thought about the choices she had made. The cancer had gone into remission once, only to return more aggressively. She had faced it alone, keeping up appearances with everyone in her life. The only person who knew the truth was Deepa, who had accidentally discovered Priya's medication when staying over one night. "You need to tell him," Deepa had insisted repeatedly over the years. "What good would it do now?" Priya would counter. "He's moved on. I'm just a chapter in his past." But seeing his face in that article, reading his words about sharing success, stirred something inside her. Had her sacrifice been worth it? Had pushing him away been the right choice? These questions had haunted her for years, but she had always silenced them with her conviction that she had done what was best for him. The bus stopped near her office, and Priya got off, her mind still filled with thoughts of what might have been. As she walked through the office doors, she had no idea that life was about to bring her face to face with the consequences of her sacrifice, and that the truth, hidden for so long, would finally come to light. The accounting firm where Priya worked buzzed with the usual Monday morning activity. Colleagues exchanged weekend stories while waiting for their computers to boot up, the smell of coffee hanging in the air. Priya settled at her desk, trying to focus on the spreadsheet before her, but her mind kept drifting back to Raj's success story. "Did you see this?" Anita from the neighboring cubicle leaned over, her tablet displaying the same article Priya had read earlier. "Isn't this your ex-husband?" Priya forced a smile. "Yes, that's him. Must be strange, seeing him become so successful after." Anita trailed off, realizing too late that she might be overstepping. "After our divorce?" "Not at all. I'm happy for him," Priya replied diplomatically, turning back to her computer. It wasn't entirely a lie. She was genuinely proud of Raj's accomplishments, even if a quiet ache had settled in her chest. The morning dragged on, numbers blurring before her eyes. By lunchtime, Priya felt the familiar wave of fatigue washing over her. The recent round of treatments had been particularly harsh. She made her way to the small break room, hoping a cup of tea might revive her. As she waited for the kettle to boil, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost declined it but answered at the last moment. "Hello, am I speaking with Priya Sharma?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Neha from Stellar Magazine. We're doing a feature on local success stories, and we understand you were once married to Raj Kapoor, whose tech company has recently gone public. We'd love to get your perspective for our piece." Priya's hand tightened around the phone. "I'm sorry, but I have nothing to contribute. We've been separated for years. But surely you must have some insights into his journey? You were together during the formative years of his company," the reporter pressed. "Please respect my privacy," Priya said firmly before ending the call. She leaned against the counter, suddenly dizzy. The last thing she needed was media attention. Her carefully constructed walls were already beginning to crack after seeing Raj's article. She couldn't risk more exposure. "Are you okay?" Her boss, Mr. Patel, had entered the break room and was looking at her with concern. "You look pale." "I'm fine, just a slight headache," she lied. "Why don't you take the afternoon off? The quarterly reports aren't due until next week." Priya wanted to protest, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. "Thank you, sir. I think I will." Instead of going home, Priya found herself walking to the city park where she and Raj used to spend Sunday afternoons. It was quieter on weekdays, just a few mothers with young children and elderly people enjoying the sunshine. She sat on a bench near the small pond, watching ducks glide across the water's surface. For years ago, her life had been so different. The diagnosis had come like a thunderclap on a clear day. No family history, no warning signs she'd recognized. Just a routine checkup that had turned her world upside down. She remembered sitting in the doctor's office, the words, "aggressive cancer," echoing in her ears while her mind raced ahead to Raj. He had just secured his first major investment after years of struggle. Each night, he would come home excited about new developments, his eyes shining with possibilities. The startup was his dream, his passion. Priya closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face as the memory of that pivotal night resurfaced. She had returned from the doctor with her treatment plan, a folder of medical information, and a heart heavy with dread. As she'd sat at their small dining table, trying to find words to explain what was happening, Raj had burst through the door. "We did it," he'd exclaimed, lifting her off her feet in a jubilant embrace. "The contract is signed. 2 years, Priya. 2 years of hard work and we'll have everything we've dreamed of." She'd looked into his eyes, so full of hope and joy, and the words had died in her throat. In that moment, the decision had crystallized in her mind. She would face this alone. The treatment had been brutal. Surgery first, then chemotherapy sessions that left her violently ill. She'd scheduled them during Raj's busiest work days, taking sick days from her dancing career that eventually became a permanent leave of absence. When Raj asked about her dancing, she'd claimed she was burned out, that she wanted to explore other interests. When he noticed her weight loss, she blamed it on stress. And when her hair began to fall out, she cut it short and said she needed a change. The lies had piled up, one on top of another, until she barely recognized their relationship or herself. She became the villain in their story, the wife who had changed, who had given up on her passions and grown distant and cold. The final straw came when Raj planned a surprise weekend trip to celebrate their anniversary, scheduled for the same days as her critical treatment sessions. Instead of explaining, she'd picked a fight, accused him of being thoughtless and self-absorbed. The hurt in his eyes had nearly broken her, but she'd hardened her heart, knowing it was for his greater good. 2 months later, he had asked for a divorce. A child's laughter pulled Priya back to the present. She opened her eyes to see a little girl chasing bubbles across the grass, her father watching proudly nearby. The sight sent a pang through Priya's heart, another sacrifice she had made. Children had been part of their plan, a dream deferred until Raj's business was stable. Now, with her ongoing treatments and uncertain prognosis, that dream seemed further away than ever. Her phone buzzed with a text from Deepa, "How are you feeling? Don't forget your appointment tomorrow." Priya typed back a quick response, assuring her friend she was fine and would be on time. Deepa had been her rock through the worst of it, driving her to appointments when she was too weak to go alone, staying with her on nights when the pain and fear became unbearable. As Priya stood to leave, a headline on a discarded newspaper caught her eye: Tech innovator Raj Kapoor to open new headquarters downtown, gala celebration this Friday. Her heart skipped a beat. The new headquarters would be just 3 blocks from her apartment. After years of careful avoidance, their paths might cross. The thought filled her with both dread and a strange, unexpected longing. What would he think if he saw her now? Would he even recognize the woman who had once danced across stages with grace and energy? More importantly, what would he do if he learned the truth about why she had pushed him away? As Priya walked home, she felt a resolve forming. Perhaps it was time to move away, to create more distance before chance brought them face to face. She had sacrificed too much to risk unraveling everything now. Yet even as she made plans in her mind, fate was already setting its own course, one that would soon bring Raj back into her life in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The hospital waiting room was oddly peaceful that Tuesday morning. Priya sat with her eyes closed, mentally preparing for another treatment session. Her doctor had been cautiously optimistic about her progress, but the cancer was stubborn, returning after periods of remission like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. Priya Sharma? A nurse appeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand. We're ready for you. As she followed the nurse down the familiar corridor, Priya's mind drifted to the newspaper headline she'd seen yesterday. Raja's company's celebration would be happening just a few blocks from her apartment. Part of her wondered what would happen if she just happened to walk by, to catch a glimpse of the life he had built without her. How have you been feeling since your last session? Dr. Sharma asked as he entered the treatment room. The fatigue is worse, Priya admitted. And I've been getting headaches. The doctor made notes on her chart. I'd like to adjust your medication. The latest scans show improvement, but we need to be aggressive with this round of treatment. Priya nodded, rolling up her sleeve for the 4. After 4 years, the fear of needles had faded, replaced by a dull resignation. This was her life now, a series of treatments, recovery periods, and the constant uncertainty of what each scan might reveal. Have you reconsidered joining the support group? Dr. Sharma asked as the nurse prepared the 4. It could help to talk with others going through similar experiences. Maybe next month, Priya replied, the same answer she gave every time. The truth was, she couldn't risk being recognized. The city wasn't that large, and Raja's growing prominence meant more people knew of him. She couldn't chance someone making the connection. 3 hours later, Priya left the hospital, the familiar post-treatment nausea already setting in. She had learned to plan her day around these sessions, nothing scheduled for the rest of the day, easy food prepared in advance, pain medication within reach. As she walked slowly toward the bus stop, the afternoon sun felt unusually intense. Her phone rang. It was Deepa. How did it go? Her friend asked without preamble. Same as always, Priya replied, her voice slightly hoarse. The doctor seems pleased with my progress. Good. Listen, I can't make it tonight, work emergency. But I've arranged for some food to be delivered to your place at 6. Just heat it up. Priya smiled despite her discomfort. You don't have to keep taking care of me, you know. Yes, I do. That's what friends are for, Deepa said firmly. Especially when you're too stubborn to let anyone else help. The comment stung, as Deepa had intended it to. They'd had this argument many times over the years, Deepa insisting that Priya should reach out to her family, to Raj, to anyone who could offer support beyond what a single friend could provide. I'll call you tomorrow, Priya said, avoiding the familiar debate. As she waited for the bus, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and an older woman peered out. Excuse me, do you need a ride? You look unwell. No, thank you. I'm fine, Priya replied automatically. The woman frowned. Are you sure? You're very pale. I'm heading downtown if that helps. Priya was about to decline again when a wave of dizziness hit her. The thought of waiting for the bus, then the crowded ride home suddenly seemed overwhelming. Actually, if it's not too much trouble, that would be very kind, she conceded, opening the car door. I'm Kavita, the woman said as Priya settled into the plush leather seat. Where are you headed? Priya gave her address, leaning back and closing her eyes briefly. Thank you for this. I'm not usually one to accept rides from strangers. Sometimes we all need a little help, Kavita replied, her voice warm. I was visiting my husband at the hospital. Heart problems. I've been making that drive 3 times a week for months now. Something in the woman's tone made Priya open her eyes. That must be difficult. Kavita nodded, her hands steady on the steering wheel. It is. But that's what marriage is about, isn't it? Being there through the worst times, not just the best. The words hit Priya like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what she had denied Raj? The chance to stand by her, to help her fight? She had made the decision for him, convinced she was protecting his dreams. My son keeps telling me to hire a driver, Kavita continued, oblivious to Priya's inner turmoil. But these drives give me time to think, to prepare myself. He doesn't understand that sometimes. Your son sounds like he cares about you, Priya said softly. Oh, he does. Too much sometimes. He's always been that way, taking on responsibilities that aren't his, trying to fix everything for everyone. Kavita smiled fondly. He's hosting some big event for his company this Friday. Insists I should be there, even though I'd rather be with his father. Priya's heart rate quickened. Your son has a company? Yes, a tech firm. Very successful now, though there were years when I worried he'd work himself to death for nothing. Rajesh always was stubborn that way. The name sent a jolt through Priya. Rajesh, Raja's full name. But it couldn't be, could it? Raja's mother had lived in another city the last time Priya had seen her. Rajesh Kapoor, she asked, her voice barely audible. Kavita looked at her with surprise. Yes. Do you know my son? The world seemed to tilt beneath Priya. Of all the people in the city, she had accepted a ride from Raja's mother, a woman who had once been like a second mother to her, but who now wouldn't recognize her with her shorter hair, thinner face, and the physical changes from years of treatment. I've heard of his company, Priya managed, turning to look out the window so Kavita wouldn't see her expression. It's been in the news lately. Yes, he's doing very well now, Kavita said proudly. Though I worry about him working too hard. He's never been the same since his divorce. Throws himself into his work like it's the only thing that matters. Priya's throat tightened. I'm sorry to hear that. The worst part is, he still doesn't understand what went wrong. 4 years later, and he still talks about her sometimes, wondering what changed. Kavita sighed. I keep telling him to move forward, but a mother knows when her child is still carrying pain. They were approaching Priya's neighborhood now, each block bringing them closer to her apartment. She needed to end this conversation before Kavita asked more questions, before something in Priya's manner or words gave her away. This is close enough, she said suddenly. You can drop me at the corner. Are you sure? I don't mind taking you to your door. I need to pick up a few things at the store, Priya lied, already reaching for the door handle as the car slowed. Thank you so much for the ride. Take care of yourself, Kavita called as Priya stepped onto the sidewalk. Whatever you're going through, I hope it gets better. Priya nodded, unable to trust her voice, and walked away quickly. Only when the car had disappeared from view did she let the tears come, leaning against a lamppost as sobs shook her body. All these years, she had convinced herself that Raj had moved on, that he was better off without the burden of her illness. But according to his mother, he was still carrying the pain of their separation, still wondering what had gone wrong. Had her sacrifice been in vain? Had she caused them both unnecessary suffering? As Priya finally made her way home, one thought kept circling in her mind: Raj would be at that gala on Friday, just blocks from her apartment. After 4 years of careful avoidance, fate seemed determined to bring them face to face. And she wasn't sure if she had the strength to stay away any longer. The days following her chance encounter with Kavita passed in a blur for Priya. The treatment had hit her harder than usual, leaving her bedridden for nearly 48 hours. By Thursday, she had recovered enough to return to work, though the shadow of fatigue still clung to her like a second skin. You look terrible, Anita remarked bluntly when Priya arrived at the office. Should you even be here? I'm fine, Priya replied automatically, the words so familiar they had lost all meaning. Just didn't sleep well. Mr. Patel called her into his office mid-morning, his face creased with concern. "Priya, I've noticed you've been taking more sick days recently. Is everything all right?" For a brief, wild moment, Priya considered telling him the truth. How exhausting it was to keep up appearances, to pretend she wasn't fighting for her life every 3 weeks in a sterile hospital room. But habits formed over 4 years were not easily broken. "Just some recurring migraines," she said instead. "My doctor is adjusting my medication." Mr. Patel nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "You're one of our most reliable employees, Priya. But your health comes first. If you need to reduce your hours or take extended leave, we can discuss options." "Thank you, sir. I'll keep that in mind." As she left his office, Priya felt a weight pressing down on her chest that had nothing to do with her illness. How long could she continue this charade? The careful boundaries she had constructed were beginning to crumble, first with seeing Raj's success in the news, then the unexpected meeting with his mother. And tomorrow was the gala. She hadn't admitted it to herself until now, but a decision had been forming in her mind since that car ride with Kavita. She needed, to see Raj, even if just from a distance. To see with her own eyes that he was truly thriving, that her sacrifice had been worth something. When she returned home that evening, she found herself standing before her closet, pushing aside practical work clothes to reach the back, where a garment bag had hung untouched for years. Inside was the blue silk dress she had worn on their last anniversary together, before everything fell apart. Before she became the villain in their story. The dress hung loose on her frame now, her body transformed by years of treatment. But with a few strategic pins and a shawl, perhaps. "What are you doing?" she whispered to her reflection in the mirror. This was madness. She couldn't just show up at his company gala. What would she say? How would she explain her presence after years of silence? Her phone buzzed with a text from Deepa. "How are you feeling today? Better, I hope?" Priya stared at the message, a sudden idea taking shape. She dialed Deepa's number. "I need a favor," she said when her friend answered. "A big one." "Anything," Deepa replied without hesitation. "Raja's company is having a gala tomorrow night. I want to go." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you sure that's a good idea? After everything you've done to keep your distance?" "I just need to see him," Priya explained, surprising herself with the desperation in her voice. "From afar. I won't approach him, won't let him see me. I need to know he's okay." Another pause. This wouldn't have anything to do with running into his mother, would it? Priya had told Deepa about the encounter in a tearful phone call the night it happened. Maybe. I don't know. Everything feels like it's coming to a head, Deepa. Like all the walls I've built are coming down whether I want them to or not. "Okay," Deepa finally said. "My cousin works for an event planning company. They're handling the catering for the gala. I can probably get you in as a server. You'd have to actually work, though." "That's perfect," Priya said, relief flooding through her. "I can handle carrying a tray for a few hours." "If you're sure, but Priya, what if he recognizes you?" It was a question she had been asking herself. For years had changed her, the illness, the treatments, the grief of their separation. Her once long, thick hair was now cut in a practical bob, her face thinner, her once vibrant complexion dulled. Would he even see the woman he had married and the person she had become? "I'll wear glasses, keep my head down. He won't be looking for me in the catering staff." The next evening arrived with alarming speed. Priya stood in the service entrance of the Grand Hotel hosting the gala, dressed in the standard black pants and white shirt of the catering staff, her hair tucked neatly under a small cap, a pair of non-prescription glasses perched on her nose. Deepa's cousin Vikram had briefed her on her duties, mainly circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, staying attentive but unobtrusive. Just blend in and keep moving, he advised. No one really looks at the servers anyway. The ballroom was transformed for the occasion, glittering with lights and floral arrangements. A stage had been set up at one end, presumably for speeches later in the evening. Priya's heart hammered in her chest as she took a tray of champagne flutes and began to circulate among the early arrivals, mostly employees and their partners. An hour into the event, the room was filling rapidly. Executives from partner companies, investors, media representatives, all mingling and networking in their finest attire. Priya kept her eyes downcast, offering drinks with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. And then she heard it, his laugh. Unmistakable even after all these years. She turned slowly, her grip tightening on the tray. There he was, standing near the entrance in a perfectly tailored suit, greeting guests with the easy confidence she had always admired. Raj looked good, better than good. Success suited him. His smile was genuine as he shook hands and made introductions, though Priya noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. For a wild moment, she considered walking right up to him, offering him champagne, seeing if he would recognize her despite her disguise. But fear kept her rooted in place. Fear of disrupting the life he had built. Fear of what might happen if he knew the truth. "Server, some champagne please," a woman's voice broke through her thoughts. Priya turned, offering her tray automatically, and found herself face to face with Kavita. Recognition flickered in the older woman's eyes. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" Panic surged through Priya. "I don't think so, ma'am," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "Yes, I'm sure of it. You're the young woman I gave a ride to from the hospital," Kavita said, studying her face more intently now. "Why are you working as a server? Are you all right?" Before Priya could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of protesters had somehow gained access to the event, carrying signs denouncing tech companies' environmental practices. Security was trying to usher them out, but the disruption had already caused a stir among the guests. In the chaos, Priya saw her chance to escape Kavita's scrutiny. She melted into the crowd, making her way toward the kitchen. Her heart was racing, her breathing shallow. This had been a mistake. She should never have come. As she pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, she collided with someone coming the other way. The impact sent her tray clattering to the floor, champagne splashing across the tiles. "I'm so sorry," a familiar voice said, hands steadying her shoulders. Priya looked up into Raja's eyes for the first time in 4 years. Time seemed to stop as Priya stared up into the face she had once known better than her own. Raja's eyes, those warm brown eyes that had once looked at her with such love, now showed only polite concern for a server who had dropped her tray. He didn't recognize her. Relief and heartbreak washed over her in equal measure. The disguise, the years, the physical changes from her illness, they had transformed her into a stranger to the man who had once been her husband. "Are you all right?" Raj asked, still holding her shoulders, his brow furrowed with concern. Priya nodded, unable to find her voice, afraid that even a word might trigger his memory. "Here, let me help," he offered, bending down to pick up the broken glass. "Don't worry about this, accidents happen." A voice called from behind him. "Raj, they're ready for your speech." "Coming," he replied, then turned back to Priya. "Are you sure you're okay? You look pale." She managed a small nod, her eyes downcast. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He gave her one last concerned look before turning away, heading back toward the ballroom. Priya remained frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. He had been so close, close enough that she could smell the familiar sandalwood cologne he had always worn, could see the small scar near his right eyebrow from a childhood accident. Yet he had looked at her without a flicker of recognition. "You need to clean this up quickly," the catering manager hissed, appearing beside her with a mop and bucket. "And then get back out there with a fresh tray." Mechanically, Priya cleaned the mess, the shock of the encounter still reverberating through her. Part of her wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of her apartment and never look back. But a stronger part, the part that had brought her here tonight, needed to stay, to hear his voice, to see the life he had built. By the time she returned to the ballroom with a fresh tray, Raj was already on stage, the spotlight illuminating him as he addressed the crowd. Priya positioned herself near the back, half hidden behind a pillar, listening as he spoke about his company's journey. 4 years ago, we were just 3 people with a dream and a prototype, he was saying, his voice confident, carrying easily through the room. Today, we employ over 200 people and our technology is helping businesses across the country. Pride swelled in Priya's chest as she watched him. This was why she had made her choice, so he could have this moment, this success, without the burden of a sick wife draining his resources and attention. But success isn't measured only in profit margins or market share, Raj continued, his tone shifting, becoming more personal. True success includes the impact we have on others, the relationships we build, the lives we touch. He paused, and Priya could have sworn his eyes scanned the crowd, looking for something, or someone. I learned that lesson the hard way, he admitted, a vulnerability in his voice that caught Priya off guard. I was so focused on building this company that I lost sight of what really mattered. And by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. The crowd had gone quiet, captivated by this unexpected turn in what should have been a standard celebratory speech. So as we celebrate our achievements tonight, I want to remind all of you, especially my team, that work is just one part of life. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't sacrifice the people you love for professional success. It's not worth it. Tears pricked at Priya's eyes. The irony was almost unbearable. He thought he had been the one to sacrifice their relationship for his career, when in reality, she had been the one to push him away, to sacrifice their love so that he could succeed. As Raj concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, Priya retreated further into the shadows. She needed a moment to compose herself, to push back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She slipped into a quiet hallway, leaning against the wall as she took deep breaths. Had she been wrong all these years? The guilt she had carried, the certainty that she was protecting him, was it possible that she had only caused them both unnecessary pain? "There you are," a voice said, startling her. It was Kavita, Raj's mother, looking at her with an expression of dawning recognition. "I knew I'd seen you before. You're the woman from the hospital." Priya straightened, adjusting her glasses nervously. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaking me for—" "No, I'm not," Kavita interrupted gently. "And now that I look at you properly, it can't be. Priya? Is it really you?" The sound of her name on Kavita's lips broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to deny it any longer. "Oh, my dear girl," Kavita whispered, stepping closer. "What happened to you? Why are you working as a server? And why were you at the hospital that day?" Before Priya could respond, a wave of dizziness swept over her, the combined stress of the treatment, the emotional toll of the evening, and the physical exertion catching up to her all at once. She swayed on her feet, reaching for the wall to steady herself. Kavita caught her arm, alarmed. "You're ill." It wasn't a question but a statement of fact, spoken with the intuition of a mother who had raised 3 children. "Please," Priya managed, her voice barely audible. "Don't tell Raj you saw me. He doesn't recognize me, and it's better that way." "Better for whom?" Kavita asked, her voice firm but gentle. "Not for him. You didn't hear him talking about you for years, wondering what went wrong, blaming himself for losing you." "He blames himself?" Priya asked, shocked. "Of course he does. He thinks he neglected you for his work, that he didn't pay enough attention to what you were going through." Kavita's eyes narrowed suddenly, pieces falling into place. "That's it, isn't it? You were sick back then, when you left him. You've been sick all this time. Priya closed her eyes, too exhausted to maintain the lie any longer. Cancer, she whispered. I was diagnosed 4 years ago, just as his company was taking off. I couldn't be the reason his dream failed. Kavita's expression softened with understanding and sorrow. So you pushed him away instead. Oh, Priya. It was the right choice, Priya insisted, though her voice wavered. Look at everything he's achieved. And look at what it's cost you both, Kavita countered. He needs to know the truth, Priya. Fear gripped Priya's heart. No, please. I've fought so hard to keep this from him. The treatments are working. I'm getting better. But even as she spoke the words, another wave of dizziness washed over her, stronger this time. The room spun, voices becoming distant and distorted. Priya? Kavita's voice seemed to come from very far away. Priya, what's wrong? The last thing Priya saw before darkness claimed her was Kavita's face, creased with worry, calling for help. And beyond her, at the end of the hallway, a familiar figure rushing toward them, Raj, his eyes wide with confusion and concern, not yet comprehending that the collapsing server was the wife he had lost years ago. As consciousness slipped away, a single thought floated through Priya's mind. After all her careful planning, fate had made the decision for her. The truth she had guarded so fiercely was about to be revealed, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Beeping monitors and the smell of antiseptic. These were the first sensations Priya registered as consciousness slowly returned. She was in a hospital, a place all too familiar after 4 years of treatment. But something was different this time. The room was private, more spacious than the ward she usually stayed in. And there was someone holding her hand. Priya opened her eyes, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. Raj sat beside her bed, his head bowed, his fingers intertwined with hers. He looked exhausted, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, a habit she remembered from their most stressful days together. He hadn't noticed she was awake yet. Priya took these precious seconds to study his face. New lines had formed around his eyes, a touch of gray had appeared at his temples. For years had left their mark on him too. Raj, she whispered, her voice hoarse. His head jerked up, eyes wide with a storm of emotions, relief, confusion, anger, and something deeper that made her heart ache. You're awake, he said, his voice carefully controlled. The doctor said you would be out for hours. Priya tried to sit up, but weakness kept her pinned to the bed. How did I get here? Ambulance. You collapsed at the gala. His thumb absently stroked the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar it brought tears to her eyes. You gave everyone quite a scare. Especially my mother, who seems to think you're my ex-wife. The last words carried a question. Despite everything, he still wasn't certain. The woman before him looked so different from the Priya he had known. She closed her eyes, unable to bear his scrutiny. I'm sorry, she whispered. So it is you. His voice cracked slightly. I thought my mother was confused. I didn't recognize. How is that possible? How did I not recognize my own wife? Ex-wife, Priya corrected gently, opening her eyes again. And I've changed a lot in 4 years. Because of cancer. It wasn't a question. My mother told me while we waited for the doctor. She said you were diagnosed 4 years ago. Right around the time you started pulling away from me. Priya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Why? The single word contained years of hurt, confusion, and betrayal. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you push me away instead? Your company was just taking off, she explained, her voice barely audible. You'd finally secured the funding. Everything you'd worked for was coming together. If I had told you I was sick, I would have been there for you, he interrupted, anger seeping into his voice. That's what husbands do, Priya. That's what people who love each other do. You would have given up everything, she countered. All your dreams, all those years of hard work. The medical bills alone would have drained our savings, and that's not even considering the time you would have lost taking care of me instead of building your business. So you made that decision for both of us. Raj released her hand and stood up, pacing the small room. You decided our marriage wasn't worth saving. You decided I wasn't strong enough to handle both. That's not it, Priya protested weakly. I was protecting you. Protecting me? Raj turned to face her, his expression incredulous. Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching the woman I loved change overnight, becoming cold and distant for no reason I could understand? Trying everything to fix whatever I'd done wrong, only to be pushed further away. Signing divorce papers because I thought it was what you wanted, what would make you happy. Tears slid down Priya's cheeks. She had never allowed herself to fully imagine his side of the story, too focused on her conviction that she was doing the right thing. I thought I was going to die, she admitted, the words she had never spoken aloud finally escaping. The initial prognosis wasn't good. I didn't want you to watch me wither away, to bear that burden only to be left alone with nothing, no wife, no savings, no company. That should have been my choice to make, Raj said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. You took that away from me, Priya. You took everything away. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Sharma entered, surprise flickering across his face at the sight of Raj. Priya, you're awake. Good. He approached the bed, checking the monitors. How are you feeling? Tired, she answered truthfully. What happened? Your body is exhausted from the treatments. The stress and physical exertion tonight pushed you past your limits. He glanced at Raj, then back to Priya. I understand this is your husband. Ex-husband, they said in unison. I see. Dr. Sharma looked uncomfortable. Mr. Kapoor, would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I need to discuss some private medical matters with my patient. Raj hesitated, his eyes still fixed on Priya. Will she be all right? The question carried so much more weight than the doctor could possibly understand. She needs rest and continued treatment, Dr. Sharma replied carefully. We can discuss the details after I've examined her. Reluctantly, Raj moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, looking back at Priya with an expression that broke her heart all over again. I'll be right outside. Once the door closed behind him, Dr. Sharma turned to Priya with a concerned frown. I take it he just found out about your condition? She nodded, wiping away tears. It's a long story. Well, he's been here since you were brought in. Refused to leave even when I told him only family was permitted. The doctor checked her adjusting the flow slightly. Given tonight's episode, we need to discuss modifying your treatment plan. The cancer isn't responding as well as we'd hoped to the current approach. Fear clutched at Priya's heart. What does that mean? It means we need to be more aggressive. There's a clinical trial I'd like to recommend. It's showing promising results for cases like yours, but it's intensive and expensive. He hesitated. I know you've been managing on your own, but having support during this next phase would be beneficial. Before Priya could respond, the door opened again and Raj stepped back in, his face set with determination. I'm sorry, doctor, but I couldn't help overhearing. His eyes met Priya's. Whatever treatment she needs, whatever it costs, I'll take care of it. Raj, no, Priya protested. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. I'm not asking for your permission, he replied, moving to stand beside her bed again. 4 years ago, you made a decision that affected both our lives without consulting me. You don't get to do that again. Dr. Sharma looked between them, sensing the weight of unresolved history. "I'll give you two some time to talk. Priya, we'll discuss the treatment options in detail tomorrow when you're stronger." After the doctor left, silence filled the room. Priya stared at her hands, unable to meet Raja's gaze. The scenario playing out was exactly what she had feared and fought so hard to prevent, Raj putting his life on hold to deal with her illness. "Why were you at the gala tonight?" he finally asked, his voice softer than before. "I wanted to see you," she admitted. "To make sure you were happy, that it had all been worth it." "And was it? Worth losing 4 years we could have had together, no matter what happened?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with all they had lost. "I don't know anymore," Priya whispered truthfully. "I thought I was being selfless, but maybe I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of being a burden. Of you resenting me for holding you back. Of you staying with me out of obligation rather than love." The fears she had carried for years spilled out in a rush of honesty. Raj sat down on the edge of the bed, taking her hand once more. "Did you ever think that maybe I needed you more than I needed success? That watching you dance, coming home to you every night, building a life with you was what really mattered to me?" Fresh tears welled in Priya's eyes. "I convinced myself you would be better off without me." "I wasn't," he said simply. "Neither of us was." A nurse appeared at the door. "I'm sorry, sir, but visiting hours are over. Ms. Sharma needs to rest." Raj nodded but didn't move immediately. "I'll be back tomorrow," he told Priya, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We have a lot more to talk about." As he stood to leave, Priya caught his hand. "Raj, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was pushing you away, even when I signed those papers. I need you to know that." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, hope, a complex mixture of emotions too tangled to name. "Get some rest," he said softly. "I'll be here when you wake up." As he walked out the door, Priya realized that for the first time in 4 years, she was not facing the night alone. Whether for better or worse, the truth was finally out. The walls she had built so carefully had crumbled, leaving her vulnerable but also, unexpectedly, relieved. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the way it should have been all along. 6 months later, Priya sat on a bench in the same park where she had once contemplated leaving the city to avoid running into Raj. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, leaves in brilliant shades of orange and red drifting from the trees above. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, watching children play near the pond. So much had changed since that night at the gala when her carefully constructed world had collapsed. Some days it felt like a lifetime ago, others, like yesterday. The clinical trial Dr. Sharma had recommended had been grueling, more intense than any treatment she had endured before. There were days when even breathing seemed to require more energy than she possessed. But unlike the previous 4 years, she no longer faced those days alone. True to his word, Raj had been there when she woke up the morning after the gala. And every day after that. He had rearranged his schedule to drive her to appointments, sat beside her during treatments, held her hair back when she was sick, and celebrated even the smallest victories with her. Their relationship had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated, not quite husband and wife, not merely friends, but partners in a battle that had once divided them. "Tea?" Raj appeared beside the bench, holding 2 paper cups. Steam rose from them in the cool air. Priya smiled, accepting the cup gratefully. "Thank you." He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. Dr. Sharma's office called. "Your test results are in. We can go over whenever you're ready." Anxiety fluttered in her chest. Today's results would determine if the experimental treatment had worked, if the cancer had finally responded. Priya took a deep breath, inhaling the soothing aroma of ginger tea. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. Raja's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Me too." But whatever news we get, we'll handle it together. The past 6 months had been filled with difficult conversations, painful honesty, and gradual healing. Raj had been angry at first, angry that she had hidden her illness, angry that she had made such a momentous decision without him, angry at the years they had lost. But underneath that anger had been a deeper pain, and beneath that pain, a love that had never truly died. "I was thinking about the first time we came to this park," Raj said, gazing at the pond. "Do you remember?" Priya nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Our third date. You tried to feed the ducks and that big one chased you. And you couldn't stop laughing," he added, chuckling at the memory. "I was trying to act all dignified and impressive, and instead I'm running from a duck. I think that's when I started falling in love with you," Priya confessed. "Seeing you laugh at yourself, not taking everything so seriously." Raj turned to look at her, his expression softening. "Why do you think I brought you here today, before the appointment? I wanted to remind us both of who we were before all this. Who we still are, underneath everything that's happened." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea and watching the world go by. It was a luxury they had learned to appreciate, these simple moments of peace amid the chaos of treatment schedules, work obligations, and the ongoing process of rebuilding trust. Deepa had been skeptical at first about their reconciliation. "He left you once," she had warned Priya. "What if he leaves again when things get too hard?" But Priya understood now what she hadn't then, that relationships weren't about protecting each other from pain, but about choosing to face it together. Raj hadn't left her, she had pushed him away, believing she was sparing him. The realization had been both painful and liberating. "We should probably go," Raj said eventually, checking his watch. "The doctor's expecting us at 2. Priya nodded, but made no move to stand. "Before we go, there's something I need to say." Raj waited, patient as always these days. "No matter what happens in that office today, I want you to know that these past 6 months have been a gift." Her voice wavered slightly. "Even with all the pain and sickness and uncertainty, being with you again has made me happier than I was in all those years apart." Raj's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "When I found out what you did, pushing me away to protect my dreams, I was so angry. I couldn't understand how you could make that choice. But now I think maybe I can." "And?" Priya prompted when he paused. "And I still think it was the wrong choice," he said simply. "But I understand that you made it out of love. The same way I'm choosing to be here now, whatever comes next, because I love you. I never stopped." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Priya's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not proposing, not exactly," he clarified, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small emerald. "This isn't an engagement ring. It's a promise." "A promise of what?" Priya whispered. "That whatever the doctor tells us today, whatever battles we face tomorrow, we face them together. No more sacrifices made in silence. No more decisions that affect both our lives made by only one of us." Tears spilled onto Priya's cheeks as she held out her hand, allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger. It sat there, glinting in the autumn sunlight, a symbol not of the past they had lost but of the future they might still build. "Together," she agreed, her voice stronger now. Hand in hand, they walked toward the car, toward the doctor's office, toward whatever news awaited them. The weight of uncertainty still hung heavily, but it was a burden shared now, divided between two hearts instead of crushing just one. Dr. Sharma's office was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the sterile examination rooms. He greeted them with a smile, gesturing for them to sit. "Before I discuss your results, Priya, I want to acknowledge how impressed I've been with your resilience through this trial. The regimen is challenging even for patients half your age." Priya felt Raja's hand tighten around hers as they waited for the verdict that would shape their future. "The good news," Dr. Sharma continued, "is that the tumor has shown significant reduction in size. The aggressive approach appears to be working. Relief washed over Priya like a physical sensation, leaving her lightheaded. Beside her, Raj let out a shaky breath. However, the doctor cautioned, we're not out of the woods yet. The cancer cells are still present, and there's a long road ahead. But for the first time since your diagnosis, I can say with some confidence that I'm optimistic about your prognosis. The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the cautious hope the doctor had offered. It wasn't a miracle cure, not a clean bill of health, but it was more than Priya had dared to hope for in a long time. As they pulled up to the apartment they now shared, Raj having moved in to help care for her during the treatment, Priya turned to him. I kept thinking all these years that I was sacrificing our happiness to secure your future, she said softly. But I was wrong. I was sacrificing both our happiness based on fear, not love. Raj took her face in his hands gently. We can't get those years back. But we can make sure we don't waste a single day we have left, whether that's 50 days or 50 years. 50 years sounds nice, Priya whispered, leaning forward to rest her forehead against his. Then that's what we'll aim for, he replied with a smile, sealing the promise with a kiss. As evening fell, they sat together on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the city lights come on one by one. The future remained uncertain, the battle not yet won. But unlike 4 years ago, when Priya had faced her diagnosis alone and made decisions based on fear, now they would face whatever came next as they should have from the beginning, together, their strengths combined, their burdens shared. She looked down at the silver ring on her finger, catching the last rays of sunset. Sometimes love meant sacrifice, but the greatest sacrifice she had made, pushing Raj away, had been one neither of them had needed. The truth had come to light almost too late, but not quite. And in that, not quite, lay all the difference in the world.